Good evening, everyone. I'm David Dawson, Director of the Wiltshire Museum, and I'm going to be talking about Crocker's watercolour album. So ostensibly this is to support an appeal we're running to conserve the volumes, but also it's a chance to talk about them, which is something I've not really done before. And it was fascinating having a go over the last few days because I about 2 or 3 days ago, I was thinking, how on earth am I going to talk for more than about 10 minutes? And then I was still assembling my talk at 6 o'clock today, thinking, oh, I'd love to do that, but I've got to talk for too long and sort of how many slides I've got and so on. But there we go. So what I'm talking about are these two albums which are in our collection. The one top left is an album of watercolour sketches by Philip Crocker, and the one on the bottom right are finished watercolours that were prepared for Sir Richard Colthall's ancient Wiltshire, which of course all of that depends upon William Cunnington. So first of all, a word or two about Philip Crocker. Now, as far as I know, we don't have an image of Philip Crocker, but there is one of his father, Abraham Crocker. And you see his dates there, which was painted by Samuel Woodford, who we'll come to in a moment as well. So Abraham lived in Frome, and Philip was his son. So Philip was born in 1779. I don't think we've got a date. As I say, we don't have a portrait of him, but we know that he died on the 24th of April, 1841. So he did quite well, really. He was married. His wife was Jane Butler, and they had 9 children, only a few of whom survived him, which is very unfortunate, but unfortunately all too familiar with in the Victorian period. Now, Philip Crocker first got involved with what we now call archaeology by working with this chap. This is William Cunnington. His portrait, also by Samuel Woodford, is in the museum, and Samuel Woodford seemed to have been almost court painter to Sir Richard Colthall, who of course owned Stourhead. But Philip Crocker was working for Cunnington from 1798, when he was about 20, and he was working for the Ordnance Survey. He was working as surveyor on the first Ordnance Survey. So for Crocker, that means he was quite young, energetic, and enthusiastic. William Cunnington, by this stage, was in his 50s. His health was a bit dodgy. He'd been told by his doctor to ride out or die, in other words, get some exercise. And for one reason or another, he picked up what we now call archaeology as a hobby and started excavating sites throughout Wiltshire. Now, one of the illustrations in the watercolor album is this one. So many of you will be familiar with the barrow diggers photo image, which I'll show in a moment. But this one, I think, sort of shows how they worked. What seems to happen is that Cunnington and Crocker would go riding, explore different parts of Wiltshire and Dorset and other counties, and sort of identify sites that looked interesting. And I like to think that this may be Cunnington and perhaps either Crocker, or it could be Sir Richard Colthall. But here they are in the upper reaches of the Woodford Valley, prospecting for barrows to go and examine. And then, of course, they're best known from this image, where I always think that Sir Richard Colthall was here on the left in the blue coat. Blue was quite an expensive dye at the time, so he looks quite bit younger, perhaps. Well-tailored, posh coat, perhaps that's Sir Richard Colthall. Alongside him, looking perhaps a little more elderly, grey hair, not that I'm one to talk, perhaps is William Cunnington. And then doing the hard work of excavating are Stephen and John Parker, 2 farm labourers from Heytesbury, which is where William Cunnington came from, who became very skilled archaeologists. And they were actually the first professional archaeologists because they were loaned out, if you like, to other people and were paid for their work. So they were the first professional archaeologists. Now, just to look at those books in a little more detail, the first one is the sketchbook. And this one should have got something that gives you a bit of a scale. I hadn't really thought about that, which is what, about 10 inches by 6 inches, 7 inches, something like that. So not very large, beautifully bound, and as you can see, tooled on the spine, Philip Crocker. And when you open it, inside there's an index of the images that it contains. See, it looks as though these were assembled much later because the way it's all put together. And the images inside it, absolutely fascinating, quite complete range, many relating to Cunnington's excavations and later published in Sir Richard Colthall's Ancient Wiltshire, but not exclusively so. I find this one interesting. Those of you who remember the amazing talk we had on the Marlborough bucket will be familiar with this. He did 2 images of the Marlborough bucket from different viewpoints. Of course, it has not survived particularly well in the intervening 200 years since it was excavated in 1804. But the watercolours by Crocker are absolutely amazing. So these two showing Anglo-Saxon glass from Salisbury, and look at the way he has captured the glass. It's his work, his craftsman, his work as an artist is absolutely amazing. Look at the detail. But this notebook is also interesting for other reasons as well. Here we have a collared urn, and you see written above it the words lost. So it's also a record of objects that have since disappeared. And we know where that was excavated from. But again, to pick up on the quality of his illustration, on the left-hand side here, you see a bronze dagger from, where are we? It's at Stonehenge. It's one of the Wiltshire barrows. And you see the gorgeous watercolour on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you see a snap I took of that same dagger from in the museum, literally at 5:30 today. And you can see the quality of the watercolour and the way that it captures the corrosion products and captures the shape as well. You know, this is true archaeological illustration. And just to add a bit of detail, the 2 bits of bone, which are part of the pommel, we now know that those are walrus ivory, which shows that people in the Bronze Age were in contact with North Norway, with Norway, Iceland, or perhaps Greenland, I don't know, but certainly the very far north. And another one that I love is this one. This is from a barrow excavated at Rolleston, and you can see he's drawn as a watercolor the object he's got in front of him, and you can see from the pencil line he's thought about reconstructing it as a dagger, but he realizes it's not like the other daggers. It has a tang, which means it's something quite different. And you can see the way he scribbled out the dagger as he's just realized that it's not that. And he's made it into a semicircle because this is actually a Middle Bronze Age razor, or what's called a razor. So you can see the thinking going into this of him looking at the objects, drawing them, and then thinking about what they're used for. Because it's worth remembering that the names that they gave to the objects that they were excavating in basically the first decade of the 1800s are object names that we still use in archaeology today. So we still would call them things, incense cups, for example, or grape cups, even though there may not be much evidence for them either being incense or grapes, but there we go. And then the second book were the finished drawings that were sent then to engravers and became the illustrations in ancient Wiltshire. And this volume is really much bigger. It's, where are we? Again, I should have got the measurements. Let's say it's about 2 foot high and about 18 inches wide. And it's really, really heavy. And from the inside front cover, you can see that it was purchased by the museum with grant aid from Museums and Galleries Commission. Fond memory of that. I worked for them once upon a time. V&A Purchase Grant Fund, National Heritage Memorial Fund, National Art Collections Fund, and donations from a number of very familiar names, Chris Chippendale, Andrew Lawson, and others. And it really was a magnificent acquisition for the Society because it does complete the picture. And here's a view of the frontispiece. And you can see here ancient Wiltshire spelt in what's the word? A way to sort of emphasize the history with image of a cremation vessel and then the surrounds made of objects excavated by Cunnington and illustrated by Crocker. So this is a gorgeous watercolour. And the fun thing is you can then see the link between the watercolour and then what then was published in ancient Wiltshire. So on the right-hand side, you see a volume, the published volume of ancient Wiltshire with an engraving of William Cunnington because it was dedicated to Cunnington by Sir Richard Colt Hall. And then you see the engraving based on that watercolour. So you see the process. And you can see that process in detail as well through to what we still have in the museum today. So these are objects from Normanton Down, tumulus XXV, as he called it. And these are the elegant little trinkets buried with what we have in the museum now called the Lady from Across the Sea. And you see on the right-hand side some amazing photographs taken for the recent study on ritual and religion in the early Bronze Age by Woodward and Hunter. And you can see very clearly the link between the two, and you can see how easy it is to identify the objects. And then this became the plate published in ancient Wiltshire. This is a bit rubbish, I'm afraid, but you can see the link through from that original watercolour through to the published version. Slightly different because in the published version, he's added in the Stonehenge cup and some of the other finds from the Lady from the North, particularly at the bottom right, the jet double-headed axe. Double-headed axe is found largely in modern-day Scotland. But this is also interesting in other ways. So this is a watercolour of the Golden Barrow at Upton Lovell, of the finds from there, with a plaque, a pendant, gold beads, and the two gold things at the top, which in Woodward and Hunter, they're clearly quite puzzled about these because Cunnington described these objects as being the top and bottom of short staffs. And he doesn't say much more than that. So we have to assume, well, maybe we can assume that he actually saw them in the ground with sort of a set at a distance apart and possibly even saw traces of the wood in the staffs. But in this drawing, in this watercolour, they've been pushed together, which is quite interesting. And then here you have the plaque itself and one of those top and bottom of the staffs. But then you go back to the original, to the watercolour in that first volume, and you can then see the difference. You see you've got number 1 and number 2 are that little sort of thing that looks like a pillbox. So here they're very clearly separate. So the discussion that's in Woodward and Hunter about how this worked, really just get altered by going back to the original source watercolour of Crocker. And it shows that those two very clearly were separate and that we can rely on them being the top and bottom of a short staff. And then moving on to that amazing frontispiece. And it's quite fun looking at where some of the objects come from, because this is very much based on objects that were excavated. But there's also a story in there, which is that in the museum, we have all sorts of background information about that relationship between Cunnington and Colthall, not just the account of that Cunnington made of his excavations that he sent to Sir Richard Colthall, but also lots of other documentation as well. So here we've got, so I just need to move something out of the way. These are some of the accounts for the creation of ancient Wiltshire, done by Sir Richard Colthall. And the one on the left says Ancient Wiltshire, Mr. Crocker for drawings. Frontispiece, £2, 2 shillings. So that's 2 guineas. Border of beads, £1, 1 shilling. So that's 1 guinea. Barrows, 3 plates, £2, 5 shillings. 9 articles from Barrows, £9, 9 shillings. And so it goes on. So you've got a really detailed list of how much he was paid for these finished watercolours. And then on the right-hand page, it says drawing, surveying, £44, 3 shillings. Engraving plates, £315, 4 shillings. Ditto maps, £50, 8 shillings. Total, £1,191, 14 shillings, which is an absolutely extraordinary amount of money. I looked up, there's the Bank of England have a website where you can stick in £1 in 1810 and how much it's worth now. Believe it or not, the rate is £1 to £10,000 today. Now, my maths is not always very good, but I think that is, am I right? That's £10 million. It's an absolutely extraordinary amount of money to create this amazing volume. Of course, it's a huge research project in its own right, with a campaign of excavations and surveys, all distilled down into ancient Wiltshire. But it just underlines how wealthy Sir Richard Colthall was. So if we keep with that frontispiece at 2 guineas and the border of beads at 1 guinea, we go back to what we can see in that second volume. And here it is. And you can sort of really enjoy that. It's just wonderful. But then we can go to and see the objects that were used, used to create that border. And here a group of beads with, I think they're shale loops. And then here we have the sun disk from Mere, which was included. And if we go on another little diversion on Mere, these are objects from Mere Down that are illustrated in ancient Wiltshire. You see a dagger. There's the sun disk, which I think is the front and back of the sun disk. I don't think it's 2 sun disks. A piece of beaker pottery, a piece of bone, which may well be for pressure flaking flint, and an archer's bracer. Now, if we go back to the sketchbook, we see something quite different. So we've got the sun disk, we've got the dagger, and we have the archer's bracer. But you see the bracer is lost. So this is the only record we have of it. And something I've not realized literally till I was photographing these the other day is that we have a presumably jet bead, sorry, a jet pulley ring, which is almost certainly essentially a belt buckle or something like that, and a V-shaped button, both described as being lost. Now, I was writing something or did a presentation for the museum in Mere about the burial there, and I'm pretty sure that those are not mentioned by in the excavation report about Mere. But I have to say, it's incredibly sketchy. And so you have these two really important, really quite important objects, because the other ones that are similar are from are of jet. They're very similar ones from a burial at Durrington Walls. And so I need to, I or somebody needs to start looking at this in a little more detail to check whether this is the case. Now, the interesting thing is, although researchers are very familiar with ancient Wiltshire as a published volume, I don't think many of them have actually looked at this sketchbook, at this of these preliminary sketches, which therefore have information in that hasn't um, really been thought about and investigated. So I think when I get to retire, I may have one or two little things to do to keep me busy. And I like to follow this same theme through also with Bush Barrow. How could I not talk about Bush Barrow? And again, we can tie up here the notes by William Cunnington of the excavation with Philip Crocker's illustrations and the various ones, the two stages that he did, and also with the objects that we have on display now. And it's really interesting to see that link. So if I'm looking as though I'm squinting at the screen, that's because I'm squinting at the screen trying to read what it says. But I'll just be picking up a few phrases in that report. So sorry, I've got all sorts of things from Zoom in the way that I need to just move out. Right, there we go. So he says uh, near the shoulders, we found the fine brass celt. See plate 1, figure 1. Notice how the wands are added in pencil, where Mr. Crocker has drawn it full size. This article had been deposited with a handle of wood from which circumstance that past which entered the wood was in a very high state of preservation. So he's saying that it was well preserved and he could see the wood of the handle. So if we go to Crocker and his illustration of Bush Barrow, you can see there the axe, and notice that he's very much got the line there down there, which you can see. And then again, this is it in real life. And then when you put the two together, you can really see again what a skilled artist Philip Crocker was. The other thing I'd like to highlight is when you look at it, can you see up here in his illustration, see the crisscross pattern? It's still there. This is this is textiles preserved in the corrosion products. So it's been remarked on, but I don't think anyone's actually looked at what sort of fabric that might be or what the weave might be. But so, oh, and again down here, which I'm not sure is visible in the axe today. Because remember, the act that this has been kicking around for 200 years, and only where are we? 120 years in the museum. The next is the talking about the dagger. The handle of wood belonging to the dagger have been richly and most singularly ornamented by an immense quantity of minute gold rivets, no thicker than the smallest pin. The end of the handle had been filled with these small points of gold. In the flat part of the handle, these rivets had been elegantly arranged in a Van Dyck pattern, which a novel and most pleasing effect. Mr. Crocker has drawn part of the end of the handle. So we'll come on to that in a moment. So this is the blade that he's talking about. And again, look at the quality of the the artistry here, and how he's picked up the bands of decoration, the corrosion products, and you can see here the remains of the wood of the handle preserved in the corrosion products and the 6 rivets for the handle. And he talks about this, which is a fitting from the dagger sheath. This is the end of the handle. This is from somewhere else completely. And this is a small lozenge, which actually isn't mentioned in the excavation report. And then when you look at the handle in detail, this is Crocker's view of the handle, the end of the pommel. And you can see here how we've got the wood of the handle surviving, but you see the sort of broken bit here. But then you see the zigzag pattern, what he calls a Van Dyke pattern, the zigzag patterning in the handle, and straight lines here, zigzags there. And note the sort of hole in the decoration there, which I find quite interesting. These are the bits that are left because without conservation treatment, the wood clearly just fell apart. But here you can see the straight lines made by the studs, as we prefer to call them, rather than rivets. And you can here see a rivet in cross section. This is the wood. You can see the black, which is a thin layer of pine gum acting as an adhesive. And this is the eye of a needle, just to give you an idea of the scale. The studs are smaller than about the same thickness as a human hair. And if we just go back, you can see that what you're looking at there presumably is a part of the section of this part of the handle, because these are arranged in straight lines. There's no indication of zigzags. And you've got a bit more round here, which means that it must be presumably that's part of the edge here. So that's perhaps somewhere there or there. And this is a close-up of some of those gold stud and some fragments of bronze. And when they were looked at in detail, I think that's one there. There's actually the ends of essentially bronze pins or awls, which were used to make the hole into which the studs were set. And I find this one absolutely fascinating. This is a pen and ink drawing done, which is bound into that first notebook, if you like, which again shows the dagger handle. And what's interesting is you see that the damage is a bit different here. So you've got that sort of grid at the top there. Here, this side, it's further down. And I talked about the damage on the other side of that first view. And here, the damage is much more extensive. So, and I only realized this today, is when you line those two up, if you take that damage at the top there being the same as that line, there's a bit of artistic license. It looks though he's extended the amount of wood that survives. And you look at the damage, I wonder whether these are two different sides of the dagger. Oh, and at the bottom here, he's drawn some more gold pins. And in the illustration that went to the printer, you've got, I can't quite read it, you've got gold pins here as well. And again, those are shown alongside. So the same sort of treatment. And what he says, what Cunnington says, there are now a number of these miniature gold rivets in the remainder of the wood, which still adheres to the brass. So that's the dagger handle. When we first discovered these shining points of gold, we had no conception of their nature. Otherwise, we might perhaps have preserved thousands of them. But unfortunately, John, with his trowel, had scattered them in every direction before I had examined them with a glass. And as some of you will know, that is the first mention of a trowel being used in British archaeology. destroying an absolutely amazing piece of Bronze Age craftsmanship. But there you are. And then we go, the next object he talks about is the article of the gold, see plate 2, figure 2. Again, note the numbers are filled in pencil, which I have supposed to belong to the case of the dagger, in other words, the dagger sheath, is drawn the exact size and is a thin plate of pure gold, neatly ornamented and in a high preservation of weight. And then there's a gap because he hasn't actually recorded the weight of the gold. And this is that dagger sheath fitting there. There it is in the museum today. And again, you can see the quality of the illustration. And then onto the gold lozenge. He says, on approaching the breast of the skeleton, we found immediately on the breastbone a fine plate of gold, see figure 2, plate 1. This article, in form of a lozenge, was fixed to a thin piece of wood over the edges of which the gold was wrapped, and it is perforated at the top and bottom corners for the purpose of fastening it to the dress as a breastplate. It is simply ornamented by lines forming lozenges from which its high preservation, it has a good appearance, and it weighs something or other. Sorry, you can see I'm struggling to read between the various bits on the screen. So this, of course, is the Bush Barrow lozenge, and interestingly, he confirms that it was wrapped over a wooden backing. And because the wood of the handle survived and because the wood of the axe survived, I think we can very much trust what he says. And when you look at the way that the gold is wrapped over what was the backing, I think it's crystal clear that it was wood. And he thinks that it was fastened to the dress with those rivets at the top and the bottom, there and there. And this is it in the museum today. And again, it's interesting to put these illustrations together, as it really does highlight the skill that Crocker had in illustrating objects. And then moving on, next we found on the right side of the skeleton a curious stone, see figure 3, plate 1. Also some curiously ornamented bones, see plate, and then there's an asterisk, then no gap, there's a gap, and a great many small ring bones which were broken into pieces. The stone is singular, being a solid mass of tubularia, that's essentially sort of snake-like forms, and polished rather than in an egg form, as a farmer observed, like the handle of a large gimlet. It's perforated through the centre, and he carries on. Now, the bit that's really interesting is it says, Mr. Crocker had not time to draw them. So that means he didn't have time to draw them before they were broken into pieces. Now, this is crystal clear that then Crocker was on site at the excavation, because if they'd been taken back to Stourhead or Cunnington's house for Crocker then to draw the objects, he would have had time to draw them. As it was, there wasn't time. So this is that egg-shaped stone, again from Crocker's illustration in the book that went to the printers. This is it in the museum with what's left of the bone rings, and this is the two together. I'm afraid that my photo of of Crocker's drawing doesn't do it justice, but you can see again the quality of the artistry here. And notice in Crocker's drawing how he's highlighted the bronze colouring on the edge of the the hole through the stone. And a detailed photo shows exactly that. Cunnington says how this was fastened at the top by a brass pin, as he called it. And this will be corrosion products from that brass pin in the wood of the handle. But again, it just shows the attention to detail that Crocker paid when illustrating these objects. So that's been a chunk of a run through some of the objects and some of the illustrations. And now to the need, why we're wanting to conserve them, why we've launched this appeal. And this is where Jane came in. Jane sort of identified, Jane Shern, who looks after our collections in the library and archive. She sort of realized the spine of the album, the large album, was really suffering. You can see how cracked it is and how some of the leather has already become detached here. And you can see that crack running all the way down the spine. It had been conserved in the past, but that had done it no favors. It had not given it the flexibility to be able to go out rather than in. And so the cracking was happening as a result. And you can see that damage there, and you can see how that was unsustainable. It just wasn't going to survive. And then for the notebook, again, the spine was cracking. You may be able to see down here in a bit more detail. The pages are actually, there was a tear here, and some of the pages were coming detached. And this is the famous barrow diggers, and you may be able to see there's some discoloration and foxing here, some foxing up here. In various places there was some foxing starting to happen, so there was a need to clean that and remove. This is some adhesive that got in the wrong place, so it was important to get to do some work to clean this all up. And here we have some of the pages are interleaved with acid-free tissue, but even so, in some places you've got the ink and the colours coming through the page and discolouring the page below. So you can see how that's starting to happen. And we have Jane Schwarm to thank, who's been researching Philip Crocker. We've got her to thank for sort of highlighting the state of these albums to us and sort of prompting us to decide to try and get them conserved, and hence this appeal. So that's the state of them, and we've had a price of £2,730 from Lancefield Conservation, who are based in Salisbury. And as you'll know, we've launched an appeal asking people to help with the watercolours, with the conservation. And there are two reasons for doing it. One is they needed doing. The other, of course, is that the next exhibition is going to feature works from our collections selected by the artist Rose Ferraby. Now, she's actually an archaeologist and artist. She's worked with in the Peak District National Park. She worked with the British Museum on the Stonehenge exhibition, particularly the on Seahenge in response to that. And she's been selecting works from our archaeological archives to highlight them not as archaeological archives, but as artworks in their own right. And she's also creating artwork inspired by Wiltshire. I know this one is Berkshire, but she couldn't resist the Uffington White Horse. It's only just outside the county. To highlight sort of in response to the amazing things that we have in our collection. So, and the two albums I've been talking about are going to be featured in that exhibition. So, thanks to the support we've had, we will be able to get them conserved, and they're now well on their way to being conserved, because we've had some absolutely amazing donations, some fantastic support for the appeal. We've had three particularly generous, extraordinarily generous donations, which means we've not had a chance yet to total up exactly where we are, but we've almost hit our target of £2,730. So if you'd like to, many of you I know have recognised the names, have already donated to the appeal, for which I'm incredibly grateful. But also just to give you a bit of an apology. I've only recently realised that the system we used has not been generating the thank you emails that it should be doing automatically. So I'm now going to be going back through all the very generous donations and write an email to thank everyone for their contribution. And once I've done that, I'll be able to total up, have a full total, and be able to let you all know where we are with that. So that's everything I wanted to say. I've been rabbiting on for 45 minutes. I hope it's not been too dull for you. But if you would like to have a go at asking any questions, please use the chat. Or if there's those of you who know rather more about Crocker or Cunnington than I do, who would like to chip in anything, you'd be very welcome. And if you let me know, I can turn on your microphone, or you could turn it on yourself and go from there. So first of all, if we could start with any questions on the chat. And in the meantime, I'll get the link for the appeal, which I should have had ready but haven't. Questions? Anyone want to add anything? Oh, right. So we've got one. Right. Couple coming in now. Bridget has said, "How were things lost? Mislaid, destroyed by time?" Probably all the above. Because what happened to the objects was that they were excavated by William Cunnington, and he took them to his house in Heytesbury, and they were some of them were in his moss house. So he kept them in his house until he died in 1810. And then they were given to Sir Richard Colt Hall, who put them in the basement of his art gallery at Stourhead. So as you look at Stourhead, the art gallery is the wing on the right-hand side, and we're in the basement there on display. After Sir Richard Colt Hall died, his son, who inherited, I think it was his son who inherited the estate, as it was fairly typical, was rather more fond of horse racing and alcohol and cards than he was of archaeology. And the objects were basically ignored for about 30 or 40 years. So there was all that time in which they may have disappeared. Some of them may never have actually arrived back with William Cunnington. Others may have disappeared before they moved to Stourhead. Others may have been disappeared at Stourhead. And some, as we heard of with the the Bush Barrow dagger handle literally fell apart, so just did not survive physically. And Rosalind has said, did he ever put scales on his illustrations, or were they all life size? There were scales on some, I'm trying to recollect now, but not in the big volumes. And although his sketches in the notebooks are more or less life size, by the time it went to the volume that was sent to the printers and then reproduced in ancient Wiltshire, then they're not to scale. So remembering this is 1810, the dawn of archaeology. That it was not much of they hadn't established how to do these things properly, or how we would do them today. But the scale shows that Crocker was using his expertise as surveyor and bringing that through into archaeological illustration. And Ian has said, are there 2 volumes? And the answer is yes. You've got the initial sort of sketchbook, as I might call it, and then the volume of finished drawings, which were sent to the engraver. So there are 2 volumes. And how many copies exist? Well, they're unique. There are no other copies. That's why they're so special. And one of the things we'll be doing while we're having them conserved is we'll also have them photographed at high resolution. We've got the low resolution copy images you've seen me use in the presentation of the volume that went to the printer, but we don't have good quality ones of we don't have any of the sketchbook. So again, that will be sorted out during the conservation process, which again means that they'll be available for researchers. So I'm just trying to bring up the museum website while I'm talking. Does anyone have any other questions? Anyone like to add anything? So I'll put it now, just put that into the chat. And just to say, if we are able to beat our target, then what we would like to do is to use any additional funding we'd dedicate that to conservation of other items in the library and archive collection. As I say, we haven't been able to total up how much where we are at the moment. I'm afraid I've done 2 grant bids over the weekend. One for the Assize Court project, which hopefully may bring in a large chunk of money, and another focusing on the Rose Ferriby exhibition, and also the one we're planning on John Piper, which will be from March to June next year. Okay, if there's no more questions, then I would like to thank everyone for coming. I hope you found that interesting. I certainly found it absolutely fascinating doing the inverted commas research, which I'm sure is not original. And as you can tell, I've got a whole bunch of questions about this that I'd love to research in more detail at another time. Just roll on my retirement. Thank you and good night, everyone.